Good afternoon, class. Today, first and foremost, my name is Cornesia Scott Bland. I go by Naisha Scott, and today I will be discussing Chapter 10 of the text, which is titled The Media. If you're following along the slides, I'm on the first slide, and it just says The Media. So we're just going to jump right into it. Next slide. The semiotic tradition. This is a tradition that is influential in helping people visualize how signs are used and also organized. Content is important, however, it's an overall product of the use of signs. There was a man named John, excuse my pronunciation, Baudrillard, and he had something called the semiotics of media. He was a French scholar under the assumption that signs had separated from the objects they represent, while media has fueled the concept to the point that nothing is real. So I kind of compared this to reality television, how it kind of sucks the life out of actual perception and overall messages within television, if that makes sense. Moving on, because objects are separated from their original state, they take on unusual meanings for us. So as things become a product of our own that we begin to internalize, they take on different meanings. Next slide. The sociocultural tradition. Now, this tradition has three modules: the medium theory, building on classical theory, and then the new medium theory. For starters, the medium theory affects the perception. Marshall McLuhan's assertion that people adapt to their environment through a balance or ratio of senses, and the primary medium of age brings out a sense of ratio that affects our perception overall. Going into building on classical theory, there was a man named Walter Ong. He branched off from McLuhan's ideas and went into what happens after, a culture transitions from speech into writing. Now, the new media theory, there was a man named Mark Poster. He had the idea that interactive technologies and network communications, like the internet, would overall transform society as it does today, because everything is so focused on, just the overall assertion of these internet modules and the Instagrams and the Twitters. And even this class, it's gotten to a point where everything is so convenient for everything. Since society it's transitioning. That's just what it's become. It's the culture. It's the new norm. Next slide. The socio-physiological tradition. Excuse my pronunciation once again. I decided to go into a root word of this called community biology, which is the study of communications from a biological perspective. Carl Hovland, along with some peers from Yale University, they analyzed the layout of the empirical relationship between communication, audience predisposition, and overall opinion change. It's categorized into three stages of persuasiveness: source, content, content of message, and audience characteristics. With the sociological tradition, truth is singular and it focuses on the cause and effect. And scientifically, it's classical in a scientific sense. Next slide. The cybernetic tradition. Cybernetics is the tradition of dynamic systems where interacting elements influence one another. This is the study of information processing, feedback and control, and communication systems. Now, within cybernetics, communication is understood as a system of parts or variables that influence one another, shape and control the characteristics of the overall system, and help achieve a balance and change. Now, theorists that are investigating the cybernetic tradition, who have investigated the cybernetic tradition, always seek out answers to: how does the system work? How could it change? How should we get the bugs out? So they're always looking for new ways, or they were always looking for new ways to just find out how they could always tweak and make this tradition an even better theory for communication. We're going to go to the next slide. Now you have the rhetorical tradition. Rhetorical studies how rhetorical theory can inform how media works. Kenneth Burke's Equipment for Living, Rhetoric, function to create identification, naming rhetoric names, or defining a situation. Rhetoric can be used as a tool for justification of actions, acceptance for situations that cannot change, and overall interpretation of situations. So the rhetorical tradition is really based on labeling situations, helping the cognitive abilities to make associations with different things that happen within our lives. And it just overall teaches audience how to assert media in better ways to help them determine their experiences within our daily lives. So, going back into what I said, it's about slapping labels onto things, helping people understand and interpret different situations, different things, different elements of their lives. It gives a title to things. It helps us interpret just a multitude of things in our lives. Next slide. The critical tradition. The critical tradition arose to counteract the tendency of other approaches to describe the communication process without questioning the outcomes. Now, the Frankfurt School, there was a man named Max Horkheimer, Theodore Adorno, and Herbert Marcus. They were all scholars that offered thoughtful analysis of discrepancies between the liberal values of freedom and the equality that leaders deemed unjust, that concentrated on the abuses of power that made these values untrue. The critical tradition has modernism, postmodernism, postculturalism, and postcolonialism as different modules within that tradition. Okay, next slide. So I have a question. Well, this is my question that I'm posing to the class in reference to the traditions that I have been discussing in this chapter. How have these traditions captured the true complexity of the audience? Or moreover, have these traditions even captured the true complexity of the audience, and how? So to answer that question, in my research, I realized that many scholars argue that the mass communication communities, the evaluations of them are too simple. And honestly, I agree with them. Like, I feel like they're a little outdated. And I think the right experience are not being sought out with the assertions, because rather than asking whether the audience are easily influenced by the media, I think it would be better to analyze when and what type of circumstance they are being influenced under, and when they're not. Like, compare those two things. This way, the view, they can switch gears and focus on how the audience's attitude changes at different times and places within these traditions. So with that, I think we just need to have a smaller scope on the audiences that we're evaluating with these different traditions. And that way we can have proper information. We can have a whole new multitude of things that we can study from. Just like those, what's the word? I'm missing the word. The summation of the experiences. We just need new material to go off of, being that these traditions are so outdated. Like, for example, no one really goes by the assertion that McClellan goes by the medium as a message. And I think if we just kind of tweaked it and we really focused on when this happens and how it happens rather than like a generalized, hey, it happens here, I think we'll have a better understanding, a lot more material to go off of, and we can kind of adapt it to, my question, like how the traditions capture the true complexity of the audience members. So I hope that answers or gives people a basis for the question. Next slide. This is the conclusion. So to culminate, we have 6 traditions in the medium theory. The medium or media in which communication begins, it contributes to the shape of our culture. Media institutions, they play a huge role in the production of our culture, and audience members and communities participate in forming the meaning of media messages. Thank you so much for your time. The bibliography is followed by this slide, which is the last slide, but I didn't feel the need to really go into the bibliography. I hope everyone had a good Veterans Day. Peace and love. Everyone be blessed. And thank you for taking your time to listen to my module. Excuse the mess. Bye.